Good morning, everyone. I'm Lucy Fisher, and it's my privilege to be hosting this fantastic panel here today on behalf of RLB. Today, I'm going to be facilitating a discussion on levelling up, what's working, what needs to improve, and what changes need to be implemented over the course of the next 18 months. Firstly, I wanted to start by saying how brilliant it is to have UKREiiF here in Leeds and the vibrancy and excitement it's brought to the city. RLB have recently invested in Leeds. We've just taken a 10-year lease on a brilliant new office space in Platform, just near the train station, and we're delivering our construction consultancy services from there. We're committed to growing our offering across the region, so conversations that will be happening over the course of the next couple of days are full of prospect and excitement for us. And if anyone is interested in having a chat or having a go on our smoothie bike, please come and see us at stand E42. I thought I would tell you a little bit about what the concept of levelling up means to me. I grew up in the northeast in the Tees Valley, which historically is a hub for heavy manufacturing, things like steel making and chemical manufacturing, industries which since the 1960s have been on the decline. Growing up in Teesside, now this might sound a little bit strange to some of you, but a family pastime would be going to watch cooling towers of local industry being demolished. Pack a picnic. We didn't go to the cinema, we packed a picnic. We'd sit in the boot of the car and we'd watch these gigantic cooling towers crumble to a pile of rubble. And at the time, it didn't really dawn on me the significance of this. I was just in awe of things getting blown up. But the significance of this was that the industry that historically was responsible for so many jobs in the area, that had put food on the table for generations of families, was crumbling too. And it wasn't just the cooling towers that were disappearing, the jobs these industries were responsible for were disappearing too. And as a result, local towns and services deteriorating. Years of underinvestment was having an impact on quality of life. Life expectancy in deprived areas of Teesside is shockingly low compared to the national average. Talented and skilled workforce leaving the area to find opportunities in London and other major cities where jobs were more readily available. And it's for this reason I absolutely love the ideology behind levelling up, because its essence creates opportunities for places like Teesside, opportunities for investment, opportunities to create thriving communities where people want to work, they want to live, they want to bring up families. Through initiatives like Levelling Up, Teesside is trying to make itself competitive on a global scale, to attract investment and good quality jobs for local people. And as a direct result of this, RLB is looking to invest in people and grow its offering across the region too, which for me is a really exciting prospect. I potentially get to work on projects on my doorstep and contribute to the regeneration of my local area. But perhaps I'm being biased because it's directly benefiting my area. Levelling up is not without its challenges. It's not without its criticism, which I'm sure we'll discuss some of today. In the meantime, RLB is continuing to work with local authorities across the country to submit levelling up bids and secure funding that is that first step towards achieving inclusive economic growth. So let's start today's discussion on levelling up. We would love some interaction from the audience, so if you can use Slido by scanning the QR code, which will come up on the slide. We have one set audience question on there, which we'll review at the end, that if you can just submit a single word or a short sentence, and it will generate a word cloud. And then we've got open questions as well. So let me introduce our fantastic panel today. We have Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Tracy is a British Labour and cooperative politician who was elected as the first Mayor of West Yorkshire and the first ever female Metro Mayor in England in May 2021. We have Ravi Chand, CBE. Ravi is the Senior Responsible Officer for the Places for Growth programme, operating across government but based in the Cabinet Office. Places for Growth is supporting the Levelling Up agenda by relocating a minimum of 22,000 roles out of Greater London by 2030. Deborah Cadman, OBE. Deborah became Chief Executive of Birmingham City Council in June 2021 after more than 30 years in public services, and received an OBE in 2006 for services to local government. Rob Perrins, CEO of Berkeley Group. Rob joined Berkeley in 1994 and has been Chief Executive since 2009. Under his management, the company has increased its focus on regenerating large-scale brownfield sites and now delivers around 10% of all new homes in London. Stephanie Hyde, Chief Executive of JLL UK. Stephanie leads over 8,000 real estate professionals and is responsible for reinforcing JLL's position as a market-leading advisor. And Georgia Gould is a Labour councillor for Kentish Town and leader of Camden Council. Georgia is also a chair of London Council's co-chair of the London Partnership Board and has a special interest in the politics and experiences of young people. So I'm going to come and sit down with you guys. So last year, RLB hosted this session, and it started with the panellists sharing what levelling up meant for them and the cities they represented. A year on, I'm really interested to understand whether you think levelling up is working. So Tracy, I'll pass that over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, the last year has been pretty tumultuous, hasn't it? A fair bit of churn in government. But I do think certainly the mayors collectively were pleased that Michael Gove stayed in his department, because he does feel like somebody that understands devolution, and there does feel like there's a little bit of an arms race at the moment between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party as to who can give away the most power. But let's see how that rolls out, potentially with who knows, a new government. Is it working? Well, I think I said last year that the beauty contest where we have to bid into levelling up funds, we know that in Yorkshire and the Humber, we are really at the bottom of the scale comparatively per capita of what we get here in West Yorkshire. That's not fair, particularly given the gap of decades of underinvestment and the time and effort that it takes to bid. Bradford spent hundreds of thousands in their last bid for Odsal Stadium and wasn't successful. Leeds had, I think, 6 bids that weren't successful. I mean, that time and effort is actually a waste of money. And then on the flip side, Halifax, for example, got money for a leisure centre. And because of inflation, they then couldn't deliver it. Yeah. So what world are we living in where we have to go to central government to ask to build a leisure centre in our community? So back in the day, it used to be the local authorities that had that sort of capital funding to build those really essential community assets. So it's, for me, we're still in a difficult position here in West Yorkshire, but I am pressing government really hard that we're going to be next in line for the Trailblazer deal, because we have all argued, all the mayors have argued, that a single settlement surely is the best way forward. We know what our community needs. We know where the areas of deprivation are. We know where we can have skills programs. We know where we can find the brownfield land to regenerate. Give us that opportunity to do that with a single settlement. So I am more optimistic, given the Trailblazer deals that happened in Greater Manchester and West Midlands. And some of you may have looked in detail at those deals. There is a real emphasis on homes in particular, which is really great. Now, I pledged 5,000 affordable, sustainable homes, but that's going to be tricky without that sort of buy-in from government to allow us to identify where we can build and for whom. So that's why the strategic partnership with Homes England is a really great step forward for us. But fundamentally, you cannot level up the north when we have a transport network that isn't working. So I was really pleased government heard the challenge that we face and have stripped TransPennine of their contract. And it's going into operator of last resort. It's a reset moment. I really think that's going to help us. That interconnectivity between Manchester and Leeds is absolutely vital for all of us here across the north. And of course, then further up to north of Tyne and so on, and down to Sheffield. So invest in infrastructure projects. That's Northern Powerhouse Rail, that new line between Leeds and Manchester. Invest in Bradford, that through station that is so needed. Invest in mass transit. And obviously, help us out with the buses, because 80% of people who travel on public transport travel on buses. So we can't level up if we don't have the basic infrastructure in place. And that's where you all come in to work with us. Hopefully, when we get a Trailblazer deal and we're here next year, we'll be able to celebrate that. So is it working? It's good and bad, but I do feel the direction of travel about giving local leaders and mayors more agency and more flexibility to deliver for their region can only be good news.
Yeah, brilliant. Ravi, how do you feel about that?
Well, I kind of... It depends on your time horizon. So for us, we're looking at 2030. Levelling up is not something that's going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a clear plan to say, what do we want to achieve by 2030, 2035, 2040? If you look at the different parts of the UK, I mean, London has had probably the best agglomeration of economies than anywhere else in the UK, and other cities have fallen behind, regions have fallen behind. We're beginning to see evidence of real growth in some of the cities. So the Devo deal with West Midlands and Manchester is a step in the right direction, and you'll see more of those. And thanks to colleagues from the Department of Levelling Up, who did a lot of great work trying to settle those deals. This will take time. But, I mean, the points Tracy landed for us, certainly us relocating senior roles, getting central government much closer to local government in all parts of the UK, relies heavily on great transport links, affordable housing, all the kind of things that really matter to people in place, matter to the kind of roles and jobs we're trying to recruit in these places. So I see already, I mean, we've been quite successful in getting quite a large number of roles out already, much earlier than I anticipated, because we were able to land them in cities and towns, because we had the right transport in those places. 5-10 years by 2030, I think we'll see a very different kind of set of arrangements across regions with elected mayors in terms of getting good deals for their places.
Yeah, brilliant. Deborah?
That's very positive, by the way. I'll hold you to account on that. Good.
So is it working? I don't think it's having the traction it needs to have, and I don't think it's working quickly enough. I agree with you completely, Ravi, and you and I have had many conversations about this. This is not a one and done. It's not even a political term endeavour. It's enduring and can take, I suspect, up to a generation to see the change we need to see. I'm going to be slightly provocative as well. So I, in my experience, levelling up a place, a community, an economy is far more complicated and involved than how it's presented at the moment. So if you have, and I'm not decrying the value of having connectivity in the north as a massive kind of catalyst to growth and levelling up, but it's just only one ingredient. And in Birmingham, working with the Combined Authority, we're trying to approach it in a different way. So there are 4 lenses that we're looking at how we can level up our communities and our economies. And it's about being really questioning and curious about how people want to live. So what kind of housing, what kind of public realm, how do we enable that to happen? And then how do people want to work? So what are the skills levels that we need to develop? What skills do we need to encourage to meet the demand that we know is coming up over the horizon? And we're not as good at that as a country as we need to be. How do we increase productivity? How do we invest in innovation and R&D in our places? And then how do people move and travel? So rail network, public transport network is absolutely essential, but so is connectivity of roads, people walking, cycling, but also that connectivity of digital connectivity as well. Not just within the city, but outside the city and the country, and actually I would argue the world as well. So we're not as good as connectivity as we need to be. And then the final one, which is the one I particularly love, is how do people love and feed their soul? And we can't ignore the power of culture and art and green open spaces and the contribution that makes to enable our communities to be far more cohesive and at peace with themselves. And then there are three challenges that we all face, I think. One is the growth and the need for us to accelerate growth across the UK. The second one is around how we deal with some of the deep entrenched systemic inequalities that we see in our places. And then the third one is almost the elephant in the room that I don't think as a nation we're addressing properly, and that's climate change. Okay. And it kind of feels to me to be a ticking time bomb that we're not addressing appropriately as well. Yeah. So in Birmingham, we're trying to look at it differently. We're trying to join up the dots. I think central, regional and local government needs to be more porous. You know, it's not a zero-sum game, you win, we lose, and this competitive stuff that we're engaging in, it's just a waste of everybody's time and money, I would argue. Yeah. So let's be more intentional about it.
Okay. And Rob?
Well, without repeating what the panel says, which I do agree with, I think if levelling up for me, it has to be, we're very output focused and actually getting delivery. And I think at the moment, a lot of the debate about is how much money has been given. And if you take central government, it's I've given X million pounds or X billion pounds without an output based. And I think we've got to take it back. And I agree with everyone on the panel. We're developing 32 of these large sites. They're 30-year sites. We don't finish our sites till 2071. We're in those local communities. What does it mean to me? It means, you know, regeneration means to me is, you know, it is that placemaking, is that community, is extending that quality of life, but it's about delivery. And I think it was said earlier, you know, the first thing about delivery is local communities get very upset when we go in and we say we're going to do something, and then nothing happens for 10 years. Yeah. So it's getting that thing to happen for the first 2 years. The other thing I would say on this, being a London developer, and hopefully Georgie will agree with me, is levelling up can't be just building the homes in the north, which was in the paper this weekend. Now, at the end of the day, London has a role. London needs a lot of levelling up as well. Yes, it's had a lot of the infrastructure, it's had Crossrail, but there's a lot of work to be done there. But I think that long-term, that really long-term focus, give a long-term settlement, proper settlements for the long term is critical, and it has to be a 20-year settlement. It's too short-term, too political, money given out to be spent next week.
Okay. Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
Well, I try and be positive when I look at things, and we're working on over 50 projects across the UK. So there are definitely things happening, but it is much too soon, as we've heard from other panellists, to say that it's working, and there's too many things in the way.
Yes.
So we've heard about the devolution challenges, planning, absolutely. Just the complexity, really, of government departments not all focused on this to make it work together, because there's so many different priorities in so many different places. Yeah. And so the clarity and the stability that businesses need to invest, to work alongside the public sector, to get that private sector involvement, particularly in the era of cheap money now being over, it's so critical to have clarity as we look forward on regulation, on everything.
Fantastic. Georgia, is levelling up working?
I mean, I think it can't work unless we give local, regional government the powers, the levers and the long-term certainty to be able to invest in growth, to be able to leverage in investment from the private sector. And absolutely agree with Tracy's point that we are spending hundreds of thousands on these bids. I think in London we calculated it's between 10,000 and 140,000 on each bid. Out of 33 that we put in, only 6 came through. I have to disclose, Camden was one of those, and we were delighted. But we can't create real long-term change in a competitive environment. And I've got my London and Manchester lanyard, and I think that there's too much pitting places against each other and not looking at the depth of economic connections between places and how the investment that we're seeing in London can benefit Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds. And I think to do that we have to have a completely different relationship with government, a much more mature and long-term relationship. And I think as local government, we are starting to do that as London Council, the 33 boroughs in London and core cities, which are 12 of the most economic successful cities outside of London have come together around something called Free CI, which is a 206 billion investment opportunity to decarbonise our cities. We're really clear about what needs to happen. And if we were in a conversation with government about a long-term settlement, we could start to have a serious conversation with investors about how to bring in that resource, we would get there. And I think the trailblazers are great, but a lot of those powers don't come in until 2026. That's 4 years before 2030. It's just much too late, and there's many places that aren't part of it. So absolutely, I think we just need to go a lot faster and be a lot more ambitious in how we hand over power and resources. And I just think a quick point on London, because we have seen enormous investment in London and productivity, but Camden, if anyone's been to King's Cross, you can see the growth there, but we have some of the poorest communities in the EU next to that, and they talk about feeling like an island of poverty in between glass. And so just having the investment doesn't mean you're capturing that investment for your communities. And so levelling up has to include every part of the country, and we need to be able to capture more of the growth that happens in our place to be able to invest in our communities, which would leave more public investment available for other parts of the country. And it's just as important to us in Camden that Leeds and Manchester have those links, because when I'm talking to a biomedical science company that's coming into the centre of London for the first time, actually being able to say, we have these fast connections, there's an ecosystem between Leeds, Manchester and London, this is how we're working together, is a huge incentive. So I hope that the next 18 months will see a real shift in how we do hand over powers and how we build on that maturity and trust within the partnerships between local and central government.
Yeah. That's really interesting to hear your views on the balance between local, regional and central government. And whether that's currently working. Deborah, how do you think that can be improved?
I think it's about being prepared to start in the same place. What is it we want to deliver for our places?
Yeah.
And I mentioned that this issue about zero. It's not a zero-sum game. It can't be you win, I lose. So it's got to be about how can we have shared endeavour and all bring different things to the table and being prepared to work better and more collaboratively together to achieve that.
Yeah.
So I'm really hopeful, and we're seeing some really good things happen in partnership with the Combined Authority and Birmingham, for example. High Speed 2 is going to be one of the most catalytic kind of events that drive economic growth, and we're already seeing the impact of that. Georgia and I probably need to spend more time just understanding how both Birmingham and London are going to benefit from that, but also be part of this narrative where Birmingham does not want to be at the end, it wants to be at the heart of a High Speed 2 programme. So it is about people understanding that everyone's got a role to play, and we just need to be a bit smarter in how we do that.
Yeah. Tracy, do you agree with that? The balance between local, central and regional government, how can we improve that?
Yeah, I think it is also about trust, that central governments trust local leaders to be able to deliver. We are part of the solution for government, and particularly around the climate emergency. We are the tugboats pushing central government into the right position. So government target is 2050. Here in West Yorkshire, it's 2038. We are prepared to be really ambitious so government can reach that target. And just imagine working across the whole of the north in lockstep with all the metro mayors, what we could achieve given the powers and the money to do that. We are helpful. We can be part of the solution for government and partners.
And Rob, from a private sector perspective?
Look, I think in terms of that, central government have to set what are their aspirations and set appropriate policy for that. And currently, if it is 300,000 homes, then they need to set policies to deliver that. I think they then go much further than that, and they do that. There's good things that you should do at regional level. Again, I think the affordable housing levels, or if it's transport, if it's schools or whatever, the best thing to be at regional. I think planning and regeneration should be local. Local councillors know what local people want.
Yeah.
And I think brownfield needs a separate category, brownfield first, as a separate planning category, local 106s, and delivering what local communities want. And I think the problem is it gets caught up in every level And it's down to trust.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's, it has to, we have to work out which one it is. My one question I would say, and I sort of, again, back to Tracy, is the one thing that we can't find very difficult to deliver on is when you have policy layering. So not if 2038 is the right date for zero carbon, then 2038 it should be. But if government set 2050, then we need to be able to follow it. The problem is we've currently got what I call, in London, you've got the national government have got a carbon reduction target, the regional government have got another one, and then local authorities have a different one. And it's incredibly difficult for us to follow that. And all we need is certainty as a business to invest, and that's all we're really looking for. So this policy layering is a real issue to the private sector.
Can I just add something to that? I think we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that levelling up will only happen through the public sector. That levelling up will only happen because central, regional, local government decide to do something. And I'm absolutely clear in Birmingham, and we're launching our Future City Plan later on today. I'm absolutely clear that we will not level up both our economy and our communities without working in lockstep with the private sector.
Yeah.
So I want to have a different conversation about how do we use what we've got, because Birmingham's got lots of assets and buildings and land.
Yeah.
I want to use that differently. More joint ventures working hand in hand with the private sector. Yeah. So let's not just assume that we're only going to achieve that through public sector subsidy.
Yeah. That leads me on to my next question quite nicely, Stephanie. How do we best utilise that private sector knowledge to unlock the potential of levelling up?
Well, to just build on what you've just said, Deborah, I mean, we've got lots of examples where we're bringing joint ventures together, working with Homes England, for example, and at York Central, to just really try and unlock the capability. So public sector typically is bringing the land and the ability to be able to build it into the master plan, hopefully help it through planning in a sensible way so that we can progress quite quickly. Whereas the expertise, that the investment, the development capability, the knowledge of sustainability, there's so many different experiences that we're seeing coming to the fore, and really it's based on years and years of development and being able to bring the best and evolving standards so that ultimately we create amazing places for people not just to live but to also work and play.
Yeah, brilliant. And Georgia, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about how we unlock that private sector knowledge?
Yeah, I think there's brilliant examples across London of where that's happening. I talked about King's Cross, and that is a long-term partnership between Camden Council and Argent, that developer, and the transformation that's happened over the last 15 years has been extraordinary, and it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have taken that long-term approach. And so I think that we are, as boroughs, as regional leaders, really looking for partners who share our values, who want to invest for the long term, who care about sustainability, who care about tackling the kind of inequalities we face. And London is this week launching our London infrastructure framework, which all of our 33 boroughs, including the city, have got behind, being really clear about what the infrastructure priorities for our city are and where we see private investment being able to bring some of those forward. So I absolutely agree. We can't wait for government to hand over more powers and more resources. We have to get on with delivering those partnerships. And I think when we do that and we come together, we have able to have a much stronger voice to have a conversation with government to say, actually, for this kind of bit of funding, you could unlock millions, even billions in investment.
Thank you. Just as a bit of a reminder to the audience, if you want to submit questions to our panel, please can you do that via the slide or QR code, and we'll come to those at the end. Next, I just wanted to touch on housing, as it is one of the biggest contributors to quality of life, and I was disappointed but probably not surprised to see it's one of the worst performing metrics on the levelling up indices. How can levelling up help improve housing across the UK? I think that's one for you, Rob.
I thought that was a question for Ravi, actually. I haven't read my script properly. Yeah, should we discuss it? Over to you, Ravi. Look, what was the question?
How can levelling up help improve housing across the UK?
Oh, look. In terms of levelling up, I think what we have to do for housing is, and it does come back to, unfortunately, it is the most important in quality of life. Affordable housing is super important. And one of the elephants in the room here is if the settlement, and I know more about London than I do for the rest of the country, but if the settlement for London for the next 10 years is £4.5 billion for affordable housing, when fundamentally London needs £50 billion, we've really got to have this debate, because regeneration sites can't do the heavy lifting for everything. Yes, we're fully doing the sustainability and the ESG. You've got retrofit coming in as well. We've got all these other issues. But if affordable housing is really important, each borough needs effectively £2 billion. We need to have that debate. How are we going to raise that £2 billion? What funding solutions there are? And if government's got a cost of living crisis, it's got to, wants to get the national debt down, we have to have that debate, because fundamentally that's what really is worrying me. And that's how levelling up across the country's got to happen into cities. We have to build the affordable housing to first-time buyers and different levels of that. So how we get into that viability debate, what can these sites and what can these regeneration sites really deliver to bring it forward? Because currently, there isn't a shortage of brownfield land. I mean, we can build the 100,000 homes, if it's for London needs, on brownfield land if we can just unlock them. I think Birmingham's got a huge land resourcing, and you said, Tracy said about the regeneration sites. So I think it is about getting down into individual sites and sorting out, but there is a real challenge on the funding challenge on these regeneration sites that need to be had. Yeah. If levelling up's going to work across the country, and brownfield is going to do the heavy lifting to the housing numbers.
Ravi, do you have...
Government's involved in the One Public Estate programme. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So it's seed funding, investment in places, working with... So we have something like £138 billion worth of public estate across the UK. There's lots of land, buildings that are not needed by local authorities and partners, NHS, others. And unlocking some of this does create opportunities to build housing. And I've seen some of those examples from One Public Estate where they've actually unlocked, just by seed funding some areas, unlocked land that was not used purposefully into thousands of homes in different parts of the UK. And in Yorkshire is an example of some of the places we found housing being unlocked. So I think we can do more, local government and central government, in identifying where that land exists and what we can do to unlock it.
Thank you. I think we touched on this earlier, Georgia. Deprivation exists across the whole of the UK, and there are many areas that will benefit from investment. Do you think the narrative of levelling up being focused potentially outside of London and the South East is right? And how are we going to get around that?
I think that it's absolutely right that areas outside of London have seen a lack of infrastructure investment. My husband's from Manchester, and it's ridiculous how long it takes to get from Manchester to Leeds. And in London, as I said, we absolutely support that shift in infrastructure investment. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to still continue to kind of grow as a global city and be able to capture some of the value in London. And I think it's absolutely possible to do both. But I think what's happening in London is actually quite scary. I think if you look at the latest census, we're seeing a hollowing out of the centre of London, and increasingly families just cannot afford to stay in the centre of London. My borough now has the lowest birth rate in the country, and in London we have over 160,000 people in temporary accommodation. That's 1 in 23 children. So in every classroom there's a child that might be sleeping in a B&B and facing the kind of the fear and stress of homelessness. And we're increasingly ending up placing families outside of London, which is which has a terrible impact on them and the places that are seeing families come in with huge needs. So I think that we absolutely have to find a way to invest in housing in the centre of our cities that keeps our mixed communities, because if we lose that, we lose the foundational economy, we lose the growth that you see in London, and you can't level up the country if you don't have a global city that's linked to the other regions. So I think that has to be central to the debate.
Thank you. Stephanie, what are your views on that?
Well, I have to be careful what I'm saying, sat between you, Georgia, and Rob, I think. But look, I totally get there's areas of deprivation in London. And indeed, we've worked on King's Cross, on Canada Water, on Earls Court. So we've seen the ability to be able to transform areas over a period of time. But for me, levelling up carried something that was slightly different, which really was sort of linked back to what you started with, that we've got key areas across the country that not only have deprivation, but they don't have hope in the future. There's no real industry there. There's no, industries over time have absolutely declined, and there's been no replacement. So this is about refreshing an area completely. It's about new skills. It's about universities working in areas to create that concentration, that clustering of knowledge and building supply chains. And that's where I think it differs. So I think levelling up does apply to all, but I think it's very different across the rest of the country to what it is in London, and it's not just about deprivation.
Just to say, just on that, because there are communities in Camden where there's no hope, and there's a certain kind of anger that comes from living next to extreme wealth and not being able to afford to feed your children, and for young people growing up and seeing what's happening around them but having no stake in it, and actually sometimes the drugs trade is better at getting into our communities than some of the opportunities, and so I think that the issue we have at the moment is we just don't have the levers to be able to shift that growth to our community. So I think that issue of hope you see in the heart of London as much as I see in Salford when I visit my husband's family.
Yeah, thank you. We know there's a general election potentially coming up next year, and we also know levelling up needs to be apolitical and span, we've mentioned 10, 20 plus years of investment for it to be of any value. How can we create an environment where this could be reality, Tracy?
Long-term investment, well, it is about stating the economic case. So let's take mass transit. That's going to be a 10, 20-year programme, £2 billion plus. This is not for one cycle of government. It is for government after government after government who have to keep the faith with a really big infrastructure project. So we're hoping for spades in the ground 2028, but that'll just be the first phasing. And then obviously mass transit is not just for Leeds, it's for the whole of West Yorkshire. So I work really closely with Conservative mayors. We all have the same challenges. This is the least political job I've ever done in my life because the challenges are the same. Whatever your political hue, you want to deliver for the public that you represent, who put you into this position to represent them. And you have to make the case to government, whoever that government is, which is funding for infrastructure, tackling the climate emergency, for skills and training, for investment, and being a global leader for your region as well. So I do think it is not about politics, it's about delivery and outcomes.
Ravi, do you agree with that?
No, I agree. Look, and be clear, I'm apolitical as a civil servant. Like, these have to be long-term strategies, as Deborah said earlier. Unless you're aligned with private sector investment, actually these things aren't sustainable. So if we're always going to be in the place that says we're built around government cycles, parliamentary cycles, and we're going to bid in every time to get more money from government, actually it's not going to be sustainable in the long term. So there has to be about a role for government, of course, to seed fund at times. There's a lot of Devo deals being done. Hopefully that's going to step in the right direction. We'll see more of those, which means power locally, decision-making locally on these issues. And I think when you have power locally, I think you're able to affect change for the longer term better than changes that take place in Westminster.
So do we think that levelling up, it's not going to be a political pinball then? We think
every government, every colour government will say they're going to do something different better.
Yeah.
And the evidence is in when they're in power. And I think there's a question, it's not for me to say, it's a political point, about the degree to which central government plays a bigger role or a smaller role in the future about what happens in place. And so, all colours of government now, parties are saying they're going to do more on this. So I don't see it going away. Yeah. And it may change language. But levelling up has been called different things over the years, and it may be called something different. But in essence, it'll be the same thing. It's about saying, are there places in the UK that have been forgotten, that we haven't really thought about? Should we be doing more to grow those places? And I think a long-term strategy about saying, can we get agglomeration in different parts of the UK in a way that we see in cities around the world? Some countries have multiple cities with great agglomeration, growth in economies. In the UK, it's very much centred around London. And so there's something to be said about how do we create that similar effect across the UK.
Yeah, brilliant. So finally, we're going to have a little bit of a quick fire round. Within a sentence, if I could grant you one levelling up wish, what would it be? Tracy, we'll go down the line.
Yeah, mass transit.
Mass transit. Ravi?
Strong focus on skills clustering around the UK.
Fantastic. Deborah?
I think in Birmingham, we've got 65,000 homes, many of which don't reach minimum standards of decency. I think there is a massive opportunity to do something completely different with our homes, demolish, rebuild, and put right a whole series of wrongs and lack of investment. You can address climate change, you can address the skills challenge, you can create a sense of hope and aspiration in our communities.
Brilliant. Rob?
In my view, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill and the MPPF doesn't work for brownfield. It works for greenfield, and it's all focused on greenfield. We've all talked about our cities and regenerating the cities. Infrastructure levy doesn't work on brownfield. So I really would ask, and I'm going on about a separate brownfield category, and it has to be outsized because the infrastructure levy will hold us back. So well-intended regulation is going to make it worse. And then the other thing I do ask for is proper funding. You know, as I said earlier, I really do think, you know, 2 billion for the funds for your rapid transport or 50 billion pounds for the affordable housing for London for 10 years, a 10-year proper settlement, properly funded. We need to work that way through. And then just certainty of regulation. Make a regulation and stop changing it every week. We've got to stop the hokey pokey of regulations.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Well, I'm going to have 2 because you had 3.
Oh, 3. 4.
Fix the planning system and clarity on regulation.
Thank you. Georgia?
So long-term settlement, new powers like the like land value capture, and just let us get on and do what needs doing in local government. We can do it.
Yeah, we've got a saying in Birmingham, which is, "Don't be buffeted by the storm, be the storm." And I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
We're ready to be the storm.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. At the beginning of the session, we set out that the panel was going to analyse what was working with regards to levelling up, what needed to improve, and where resources should be focused over the next 18 months. So I think we've discussed the first 2 parts. The last part, though, we thought it would be really interesting to get up a word cloud with a bit of audience participation, and then the panel can discuss it. So if we can get the word cloud up. What one thing do you think should be improved or implemented over the next 18 months to have the greatest impact on the success of principles behind the Levelling Up agenda? So, transparency and public transport are up there. Devolution, delivery. Tracy, how do you...
Yeah, that's so
everything that you
interesting, isn't it?
expected to see.
Transparency right at the heart. And it's what we were saying about trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we need to work collaboratively together and also to be able to trust each other. I think that's quite illuminating.
Yeah. Is there anything there that is a bit of a surprise or anything that you wouldn't expect to see?
I like to see well-being, actually, because there is, when we're talking about levelling up, it's not just about the economic argument. It's about how do people feel? Do they have somewhere that's safe to live? Can their kids get a job? Can they have a holiday because they've enough money left over at the end of the month? It's been so challenging with the economic crisis recently. I mean, as mayor, I'm able to allocate £3 million to the mayor's cost of living crisis fund to go into our community for warmth and food and mental health support. But we'll never level up unless we tackle the mental health crisis. I've been really pleased that a couple of weeks ago we announced our inclusivity champion, an extraordinary woman who's going to help me level up in my own community. But a lot of that is about well-being, and that's why culture is really important as well. So you can go see things, you can be part of things, and if you have a mental, health challenge, you can be part of an art class, or you can have dance for people with dementia, that life is better, there is more hope, and you are happier. And surely it's not just the economy, but it's also how we feel.
Yeah. Deborah, I see ultra-fast connectivity, public transport, HS2 on there. They all things that you would expect to see?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And quite right that they are on there, really.
Fantastic. Has anyone got any more comments of anything that
I was just surprised that transparency is the #1 word.
Yeah.
Because it's not been used a lot, particularly today on the panel. Many of the other things probably add up to that behind it. So it was interesting.
Yeah, just be understanding to know what's behind that, really. Is it transparent? Is it the opaqueness of the word of the planning system? Is it lack of transparency around decisions that are made? Just be really interesting to understand.
Yeah.
What's behind that, really.
Okay, we'll go on to some audience questions. I think if we can get them up, please. Okay. So, should levelling up be depoliticised? I think we sort of touched on that earlier, didn't we? Ravi, there's one for you there.
One public estate. Is funding available to local authorities? Yes. Is it going to be made more widely available? Mark Chivers, the Government Chief Property Officer in the audience, I'll let him answer that later in terms of making it available more widely. I'm not aware at the moment of any plans to do that, but I'm sure when Mark speaks, he'll talk to it tomorrow.
Fantastic, thank you. Tracy, it's great to hear you talking about Devo 2. How far off is West Yorkshire from a similar deal?
Well, what we're trying to do is to work with the DLUC and also the other mayors to try and get a sort of off-the-shelf version of the Trailblazer deal that then we can add bolt-ons to that and to get that over the line as soon as possible. Because the Trailblazer are exactly that. They've blazed a trail. So hopefully we're in a position where we can then say a lot of the heavy lifting, and it has been incredibly hard work getting to this next phase of devolution. That heavy lifting has been done. Hopefully now it's going to be much more straightforward for those MCAs that are ready to be able to go to the next level. So I'm fairly optimistic.
Thank you. Deborah, you've nailed it.
Well.
Levelling up is very siloed. Does the government, does the local and central government understand that we need a unified approach? Do you think that understanding is in place?
Not as well as it needs to be. No, but it is.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting.
We're
there.
talking in a way that I think is constructive.
Yeah, but it is about being more intentional and relentless about, asking for the conversations that need to be had rather than being complicit in that. I mean, the one that really interests me is does the panel think there's an inherent distrust between the public and private sector, which is stifling growth? Now, my view in Birmingham, if we start from the premise that we don't trust you, then we're never going to do the stuff that we need to do, which is around more joint ventures, more joint investment, and more ownership of not just understanding the challenge, but joint ownership of developing solutions together. Yeah. So, if anyone in this audience feels that they are not trusted when they approach Birmingham, then come and have a conversation with me, because that's absolutely not the environment I want to see in the city.
And just building on that, I mean, that's one of the major things we do is bringing people together to solve that, the public and private together. And I don't see that distrust there. What I see is in the past there's been very different conversations, different lenses on the challenge, and not always an understanding from the public sector about what the private sector needs to see to put the money in.
Yeah.
I think that's got a lot better over the last few years. There's still a little way to go because, there always will be a bit of evolution there, but generally there's much more commonality, and I certainly don't see distrust.
I think the private sector, I think the private sector has to earn that trust.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't delivered on the placemaking, in some of those placemaking, some of the quality of place and some of those areas, and, really between the spaces in the best biodiversity net gain and areas. So I think the private sector has to keep working to gain that trust and keep delivering for those local communities. And I think, and I said it earlier, I think the private sector has become quite short-term, partly because of policy, and it needs now to, we need to regain trust to be long-term. And that's what we want from the local authorities to say, trust is there, you can invest for 20 years. I think business has got very short-term in every sector, and you're seeing this being mentioned in the press. And can we change that trust to say, come to Camden, you can be here for 20 years, you know what you're going to get. Come to Humber, you're going to get that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that there is actually quite deep distrust about development from communities in London, certainly, because I think there have been some developments that have happened that have, people feel that they have been pushed out of where they live, that they've pushed up house prices, and they have felt that their place they live is no longer for them. So that absolutely exists. And there are some really brilliant developers we work with, like yourselves, who take a long-term approach. But there are some who overpay for the land, kind of knowing that they're not going to be able to deliver affordable housing, and then you kind of get to a viability place. So all of that exists, and I think there's something about how we drive up those standards, how we work with those investors and developers who are in it for the long term and able to kind of deliver for our communities. But if people are pushed out by development, they will reject it. And so we have to work alongside our communities and put their voices at the heart of the change that happens in our places.
Yeah. Tracy, did you have...
I think trust comes from delivery, when you see things actually be delivered in a community. And I was on site with Monroe Kay at White Rose. Together, we're working in partnership, building a new railway station for the shopping centre, but it's unlocking hectares of homes and office space and so on. And it's going to be absolutely brilliant for that community in Cottingley, one of our most deprived areas across West Yorkshire, with least access to opportunity. So I think working in partnership, when it goes well, we should really celebrate it. Tileyard, you were talking about King's Cross, they're developing next to one of Europe's most extraordinary art galleries, the Hepworth, and they've got some really big mills there that they're doing an extraordinary job. And working in partnership, when it goes well, that builds the trust. And so that flexibility between public and private is the way we're going to deliver levelling up.
Thank you. I'm really conscious of time, so I think we'll leave it there. And thank you very much to the panellists for that fantastic, thought-provoking discussion. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. We heard some really interesting viewpoints there. It's been great to hear what you guys have thought, and I thought that transparency piece there that came from the audience was really interesting as well. Thank you for your time, and if anybody has any questions for RLB, please come and see us at Stand E42.
Great. Thank you.